Hello, Com 141 students. This is the midterm study guide video. This is where we're going to go over basically all of the chapters that you've read up until this point at midterm going into week 8 of Com 141, and basically all of the main points and most important information from those chapters. So we've discussed a lot of things in class and in-class discussions, and this is kind of bringing all of that stuff together into one document and one video here where I'm going to go over the document in detail. So my suggestion would be print out your midterm study guide if you don't already have a hard copy, and have it with you while you watch the video. And you can add notes to your midterm study guide as you go. You can pause, rewind, and get the information that you need so you know that you're clear on all the questions. Because if you know the information on the guide, you're going to do great on the exam. There's going to be no surprises, okay? So first thing I wanted to show you here was on our Cobra website, if you want to access that midterm study guide, I've made that available for you on Cobra. So you can just click on the content link, go to the week 8 module. It's called mid-semester. In there you'll see, there's no readings or quiz for this week. You're finishing your interviews and you're studying for the midterm. So the midterm study guide document is available right here in the week 8 module. You can click on it. You can also click on the arrow and download that directly to your computer. So that's always accessible via the week 8 module in Cobra. So I've got that midterm study guide pulled up right here, and we are going to go over it now. And I'm going to try to go into as much detail as possible on all of these points and cover everything as needed for you to get the questions right on the midterm. So you can see up here at the top, this is the midterm study guide. The midterm exam will be taken next week on Tuesday, October the 10th. So you have to be present to take the midterm and get the points. So being present next Tuesday on the 10th is going to be extremely important. All right, we're going to jump right into the content. So we started with chapter 1, the introductory chapter, which was all about learning about what is professional announcing, some history of radio, a little bit of information about employment, and then those 4 main categories. So starting here at the top, there were some terms to know, and we defined a few terms at the very start of class related to announcing as a career. So the first thing that we defined is professional announcing. What is professional announcing? It's a very simple definition. Performing in front of a microphone or camera and being paid to do so. That's it. If you're performing in front of a microphone or camera and being paid to do so, you are a professional announcer. A media performer. What is this? We can simply think of a media performer as a broader definition of an announcer that better fits today's modern technological advances. The idea being not all announcing is now for traditional broadcast media like radio and TV. We also have internet radio, satellite radio, video blogs, and so much more ways for people to use their voices in a professional capacity. And then we have these terms personality and talent. They essentially mean the same thing. It's somebody who is skilled on air, but what we talked about in class is, generally speaking, the term personality is used for somebody who is skilled on air in radio, while talent is used to describe someone who is skilled on air in television. Okay, so there were some terms to know and their definitions. We talked a little bit about the early days of radio versus modern radio. Basically, what I want you to know is that in the early days, announcers were predominantly male. It was considered required to have a deep, bass-heavy baritone voice, and a very stylized proper delivery was used. Now, much different. Anyone with a pleasant voice and conversational tone can announce and be successful on radio. So that's all you need to know about that. Announcing employment, I'm not going to be asking you specific numbers, but you should know that In in a broader context, looking at it from a kind of a farther perspective, we can look at the broadcast announcing industry as a rather small industry. Also, unfortunately, what we would define as relatively low or medium range salary. Like we talked about, you're typically not going to get rich in radio unless you are lucky enough to make it to one of those high level commercial radio stations in a large metropolitan market. That said, you can make enough to effectively support a family with a median range between 30 and 40,000 for yearly salary. And the job satisfaction is very high. Another thing to note is just simply that in general, television does pay more than radio. And then last but not least, we talked about the four main categories of announcing and the differences between them. So, what is music announcing? That is things like radio disc jockeys, internet or satellite radio announcers. We also talked about video jockeys for cable TV, a kind of dying career field, but it's still around on some specialty channels and is kind of re-emerging on the internet. So music announcing is anybody who is using their voice in a music capacity, the most common example being a radio DJ. The second category of announcing is news. We broke that down into two subcategories, anchors and reporters. So basically what I want you guys to know here is that anchors are the lead on-air talent. That's how we define an anchor in news announcing, the lead on-air talent. While the reporters gather, write, and sometimes read and deliver news, okay? But that's the difference. Anchors lead on-air talent, reporters gather, read, write the news. Sports announcing, the third category. There were three main positions or career paths within sports announcing, and we defined each three in class. I'll go over those again right now. Sportscasters, play-by-play announcers, and play analysts. So the main difference here is that sportscasters are in studio, while play-by-play and play analyst announcers are at live sporting events. So a sportscaster is somebody who is doing sports news in a studio. That could be on a nightly newscast, or it could be on a specialty program on cable, such as Sports Center. While play-by-play announcers and play analysts are the ones doing the live sports broadcast from the game. And so the play-by-play announcer is the lead announcer of a live sporting event. They're the one calling the plays as they happen. They're generally the first one you hear when you come back from break, so on and so forth. While the play analyst is also known as the color commentator. They are the support for the play-by-play announcer. They provide analysis, supporting info, and they help the play-by-play announcer create a more interesting broadcast by having a discussion. A lot of times a play analyst is going to be somebody specialized in that sport, like a former player or a former coach. And then finally we have the fourth catch-all category, and that is the specialty category of announcing. And this is anything that's not music, news, or sports. So think of things like commercial voiceover announcers, documentary narrators, audiobook narrators, character actors who are just doing voice work. And the list goes on and on and on of ways people can use their voice in a professional capacity that is not for music, news, or sports. Talk show hosts also fall in that category as well. Okay, jumping to the next chapter that we covered. This was the one that correlated with Project 1 and your voice analysis. Chapter 4 was all about vocal development. So we started with how is sound produced, the diaphragm, and how it relates to announcing. So we talked about the diaphragm being the important starting point. That's the muscle in the mid-abdomen area that starts the process of producing sound. So the diaphragm is a flat muscle that separates the lungs and heart from the stomach. It contracts and relaxes, and that contraction and relaxation forces air up through the voice box. So the diaphragm is very important, and we've talked about using diaphragmatic breathing to facilitate having all of our lung capacity when being an announcer. We also talked about the importance of the articulators and the resonators. So the articulators are the teeth jaw, tongue within our mouth that shape words in or shape sounds into recognizable words, while the resonators are the bones and the sinuses in our head that help to improve the overall sound. And once again, I had you think of this like the bell of a trumpet, right? And the goal of that shape is to improve the tonal quality of that instrument. The bones in our head work the same way. So diaphragmatic breathing technique is the proper breathing technique. This is where as you breathe in, your abdomen should move outward. As you exhale, you should relax and feel your diaphragm come back in. Versus the wrong way of breathing, thoracic breathing, which is where you're pulling your stomach in when you're inhaling and pushing it out on exhale. This allows only about 40% of lung capacity. So we want to use diaphragmatic breathing technique. Finally, maybe the most important part of chapter 4 was the key elements of vocal development: volume, pitch, rate, and tone. So let's define those real quick. Pretty simple definitions here. Volume is the loudness or softness of your voice. Okay? And that is different from pitch, which is the highness or lowness of your voice. So volume, we're talking loudness or softness. Pitch, we're talking frequency. So we're talking high pitch versus low pitch. Remember, I talked about a cymbal versus a kick drum as an instrument example to help hopefully clarify that point for you. Rate, the third key element, is tempo, essentially. So rate is defined as the tempo of your speech or the number of words you deliver in a given period of time. And then finally, the fourth element is tone, and that is simply the quality of the sound being produced. And it relies on the first three being done properly to have an effective tone or effective quality of sound. So be able to describe each of those four and know the differences. That moved us into chapter 5, which was very much just a building on chapter 4, talking about taking those key elements and manipulating them over time, changing them over time to add interest and emphasis to our delivery. So here are those 6 key performance elements. The first and probably most important of all is inflection. This is pitch variation. So varying your pitch over time throughout your read to give words emphasis. Volume. The idea is to vary the loudness and the softness. Louder for parts you want to emphasize, softer for more secondary parts. Pauses. Pauses are okay. Sometimes pauses can be used very effectively. It can create emphasis, it can break up the script, it can give you a breather and time for your audience or listener to comprehend what you just said. Rate. We want to vary our rate, and we talked about numerous examples in class of how you can slow down to emphasize things or speed up and talk really fast to make something more secondary. And then finally, mood and energy. Basically, what I want you to know here is that you have to understand what the script calls for. So is it serious? Is it upbeat? Is it happy? Is it sad? What is the mood? Make sure your delivery fits the script properly. And then finally, energy is key. You have to have energy to bring life to the message, but be careful not to overdo it. Okay, that moves us into chapter 2 on the audio environment. Know the difference between the on-air studio and the production studio. So the on-air studio is where the DJ goes live on the air. It's where our DJs go on for their shows on 88.7. The production studio is where we pre-produce content for later playback. And you guys have used the production studio for a couple of projects now. Know the term working combo and what it means. I've got the definition right there on your study guide for you. It means announcing or being an announcer, DJ, and also operating the equipment at the same time. So you're essentially the announcer and the engineer. That is what working combo means, and it is a very common occurrence in small and medium market radio. Then we went into some information about how microphones work. What is a microphone? It's a transducer that converts an announcer's voice into an audio signal. Well, what is a transducer? It's anything that converts one form of energy into another. A microphone is simply one example of that. We talked about other examples, things like speakers, a guitar string, even the ears on the side of our head. All right, that's going to wrap it up for video 1. I'm going to pick this up in video 2, right where we left off.